They laughed when I walked out. They didn't know I was walking away with everything. My name is Danielle. I'm 37 years old. And this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. It started in the kind of house that people in our small Tennessee town used to drive by just to gawk at: white brick, black shutters, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs that creaked in the summer wind. Inside, the dining room glowed amber from the chandelier my mother had insisted on getting from Memphis during her fancy phase, when she believed good lighting could fix a broken family. It was the annual family dinner, the kind of thing that looked picture perfect on the outside. Polished oak table, white linen napkins, candles flickering between steaming platters of roast chicken, scalloped potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds. My sister-in-law giggled too loud. My niece scrolled through TikTok under the table. And my mother, well, she just kept refilling wine glasses like it was her only job in this world. I sat at the far end. The dim corner where the chandelier's reach didn't quite touch. My wine glass was nearly empty. No one noticed. Bryce, my older brother, 4 years ahead of me, twice as smug, was holding court as always. Tan from his last trip to Cabo, Rolex just barely peeking from under his cuff. Collar open, like he was still waiting to be interviewed by Forbes. Bryce, it's been a crazy quarter. You know how it is. Expansion, overhead, tax shelters. He chuckled like he was letting us in on a private joke. But family always comes first. That's what Dad wanted. That line. Dad wanted. He used it like armor, like a weapon. My jaw tightened. I said nothing. He looked down the table at me. That same look he used to give me when we were kids. And he'd stolen the last pancake off my plate. Bryce. Which brings me to this. He reached into his ice coat pocket and pulled out a sleek white envelope. Held it up between 2 fingers, like it was some grand gesture. Everyone's eyes turned. He slid it across the table. It made the softest whisper as it moved. Paper on polished wood, like a secret being, shared in plain sight. The envelope landed in front of me. My name was on it, not scribbled, not casual, typed in bold ink. Center aligned, like a formality. I didn't move. Bryce, it's a little something to help you out, sis. I know times have been rough. That word clawed at my ribs. He said it like he hadn't watched me struggle through the estate transition after Dad died. Like he hadn't seen the unpaid hospital bills or the cost of cleaning out the house alone. Like he hadn't seen my hands, raw from scrubbing mold off the garage ceiling. Last winter when the pipes burst and no one showed up to help rough, I opened the envelope. Inside, a check. Crisp. New. Signed with his sharp, sweeping signature. Only one problem. The amount line. Blank. I stared at it. My heart didn't race. It just paused, like it wanted to skip this part. Bryce leaned back in his chair, glass of red wine in hand. Bryce, smiling. Go ahead. Fill in whatever you think you're worth. Silence. Then a few nervous chuckles. My aunt cleared her throat. My mother forced a brittle laugh and said something about Bryce always being a joker. I looked around the table. They were all pretending this was normal. Like it was some harmless family joke. Like I hadn't just been handed a check that doubled as a slap in the face. Bryce raised his glass to me. Bryce, to my baby sister, the real heart of the family. I folded the check, slowly, precisely. The edges aligned perfectly, just like the numbers he had once cooked when he convinced Mom to let him handle Dad's will. I put the folded check back into the envelope, pressed the flap shut with my thumb. Me, Thanks, Bryce. That's generous. His smile twitched. A flicker of confusion, like he was expecting me to cry, or snap, or plead. I did none of those things. Instead, I set the envelope beside my plate, took a long sip of my lukewarm wine, and let the conversation move on without me. The rest of the evening unfolded like a stage play I'd already seen 100 times. Laughter, stories about who got what job, my cousin showing off ultrasound, pictures, plans for a 4th of July BBQ in the Smoky Mountains. But my eyes kept drifting back to that envelope, not because it hurt, but because it was stupid, sloppy. He'd handed me evidence without realizing it. When the plates were cleared and my niece began dragging her backpack toward the door, I stood and kissed my mother on the cheek. Mom, you're staying the night, right? Me, can't. Got some things to handle in the morning. Her hand lingered on mine. Mom, softly. Don't let him get under your skin. He means well. I didn't respond, because she didn't know. Not yet, but soon. Everyone would. As I stepped outside, the night air smelled like honeysuckle and cut grass. Crickets hummed in the dark. I pulled the envelope from my purse and looked at it again under the porch light. That check, that empty, smug insult, wrapped in formality, was going to be the first brick in the wall I'd build. Not to protect myself, but to corner him. And when it was done, he'd know exactly how much I was worth, because I was going to make him pay every cent of it. I walked to my car slowly, memorizing the angle of the porch light, the way shadows cut across the driveway. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, pale against the leather, an accusation dressed as a gift. Driving home, the road ribboned into small-town dark. No neon, no hurried city lights, only moon and occasional porch lamplight. I kept the headlights low and listened to the old engine breathe. The night smelled of cut grass and late summer heat. At my kitchen table, under the pendant lamp, I opened the envelope once more. The blank amount line looked back at me, daring me to react. I could have torn it up. Instead, I made a list. Practical things first. Inventory estate documents. Photograph paperwork. Get copies of bank statements. Consult a lawyer. Open a separate account. Change passwords. Lists were a language I trusted. They translated emotion into action. The next morning I started digging. Receipts tucked in coat pockets. Cancelled checks. Emails printed with my father's little arrows. And notes. Breadcrumbs I'd missed in grief. Patterns emerged. Transfers with vague descriptions. Numbers that didn't line up. It wasn't poetic. It was arithmetic and paper trails and the patient dullness of cataloguing the past. I called a lawyer who handled estates with a blunt, efficient voice. She told me not to confront anyone until we knew the trail. I listened. I opened a discreet account and photocopied everything, hiding originals away. Small methodical steps felt like the only honest prayer. I planted questions like seeds. Did Bryce ever mention helping Mom with the bills? I asked casually, letting neighbors and cousins answer in front of me. Small acknowledgements became evidence. A neighbor remembered men moving boxes late one night. A cousin recalled a conversation about an investment Bryce had excitedly described. Each memory, once prompted, filled in a corner of the picture. I kept the check folded in a drawer, the ember at the center of my planning. Evenings became hours of mapping, timelines, highlights, red-circled alternates. My plan was precise, boring, relentless. I wasn't interested in dramatic revenge. I wanted the numbers laid out, so plain even a casual listener would see the theft for what it was. When hearings began, I walked into the courthouse, assembled in ways I hadn't been at that dinner table. I had a lawyer who spoke plainly, a bank manager willing to trace old transfers, and a cousin who agreed to a statement. The documents were organized, labeled, cross-referenced. The room smelled like paper and lemon cleaner. Faces that had laughed now avoided my eyes. The ledgers spoke. Transfers were explained. Signatures matched where they shouldn't have been. The total was precise. A cold tally of what had been rerouted, what had been obscured under tidy phrases. Bryce's confidence dissolved not with a shout, but with the steady presentation of fact. There was no dramatic collapse, just the slow, inevitable shrinking of his excuses. When the final accounting was read aloud, the courtroom was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. The figure on the ledger was a number that matched the private aching energy I'd carried. Exact, undeniable. He looked smaller then. Not because I wanted him to be humiliated, but because reality had rearranged him into the space his choices deserved. They didn't laugh that day. I left the courthouse with a stack of papers and a check of my own. Not the kind you sign in jest at a dinner table, but a careful restitution. The town watched, with the sharp, slow attention of people who noticed when a story finally made sense. Back at home, the envelope still waited in its drawer, now redundant. I folded the restitution into a different drawer and closed it deliberately. The house smelled of lemon and clean paper. Outside, the night had the same small-town dark, but it felt lighter, less like a lid and more like an open sky. In the months that followed, things rearranged themselves into a new normal. I paid bills that had been deferred, fixed the roof section where water had pooled for lack of attention, and made quiet improvements Dad would have liked. A fresh coat of paint in the kitchen, new knobs on the cabinets. Practical things, because power measured itself in the capacity to keep a life running without loans or apologies. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a single accusatory thing online. Power, I learned, tasted like the hum of a well-ordered home and the small satisfactions that come from attention. I started a small consulting job, helping elderly neighbors sort paperwork, something that let me use the skills I'd sharpened without every day being about that one family dinner. Sometimes, at night, the memory of the chandelier-lit dining room returns. The laugh, the jibe, the envelope slid across polished wood. I think about the moment, and I don't feel triumphant so much as steady and wary. The blueprint I built was not just for revenge. It was for survival and dignity, for a woman who had learned to sift grief and stubbornness into a plan. It became a kind of quiet manifesto. And Bryce, he kept being Bryce in small ways. A joke at Christmas, a practiced charm at family gatherings. But the script had changed. People listened differently now. When he referenced what Dad wanted, fewer heads tilted with unquestioning assent. The words had lost their armor. They laughed when I walked out the first time. Not anymore. The wine hadn't even settled in my stomach before the ache started. Not from alcohol, from shame. You know that feeling, when everyone's laughing, but the joke is on you, and they're too polite to say it out loud. That check burned a hole in my purse the whole drive home. One hand on the steering wheel, one clenching the leather strap, like I might rip it off. It was just after 11 when I pulled up to my place. A modest 2-bedroom near the old train tracks in Franklin, Tennessee. Nothing like Bryce's gated community castle in Brentwood. The porch light flickered overhead, as if debating whether I deserved illumination tonight. Inside, my cat Daisy barely stirred. Smart girl. She knew not to expect joy when I came back from family dinners. I sat at the kitchen table, didn't bother changing, just kicked off my heels, poured a glass of water, and stared at the envelope again, still sealed, still silent, still laughing at me. I opened it one more time, unfolded the check slowly, like peeling back a wound. There it was, his signature, the date, the words, pay, to the order of Danielle Monroe, and a line so blank it felt personal. Whatever you think you're worth, he'd said. The humiliation made more sense when I remembered the last time we'd spoken about Dad's will, right after the funeral, right after I'd come back from taking care of the hospice paperwork. Bryce had already taken care of things. Bryce, don't worry about the estate stuff. I'll handle the legal side. You handle the emotions. Fair trade, right? That line had hit me sideways back then. I hadn't thought much of it. I was too tired, too raw, too trusting. But tonight, with that check in front of me, something twisted. A quiet alarm, soft and persistent, started ringing in the back of my mind. I opened my father's old lockbox, the one I kept out of sight in the hallway closet, under a stack of tax folders and expired coupons. Smelled like cedar and old paper. Inside, a few letters, some photos, a copy of his will. I'd never really read it before. Not carefully. Bryce had said it was basic, even handed me a one-page summary from the estate lawyer, all neat and notarized. But now I needed to know, really know. I read the will, line by line. Dad had split everything 50-50 between us. Simple, clear, no frills. Half to Bryce, half to me. And yet, where was my half? Because Bryce had claimed the house, he'd liquidated the cars, cashed out the stocks, told me everything else had gone to taxes, debt, maintenance. I'd believed him. I sat back in the chair and let that realization sink in. I hadn't been left out. I'd been erased. I opened my laptop. The estate lawyer's name was still saved in my email. Darlene Stone, probate law, Nashville. I typed a short message, trying to keep my hands steady. Hi, Darlene. I hope this finds you well. I'm reviewing some old estate documents and had a few questions, specifically about the original distribution records. Could we speak sometime this week? I hit send, then stared at the screen for a while, heart ticking, slow and heavy, across the room. Daisy jumped onto the windowsill and curled into a perfect, indifferent ball. Smart girl. Sleep didn't come easy that night, and when it did, it brought dreams that smelled like paper, brittle and burning. The next morning, Darlene replied, "Happy to connect, Danielle. Let's talk Wednesday. I'll pull the original filings and statements in advance." That gave me 2 days. I spent them digging, not just through legal stuff, but through memories, phone calls, offhand comments Bryce had made, family stories that didn't quite line up. I remembered when he bought that luxury SUV a month after Dad passed. He'd said it was a business write-off. I remembered the vacation photos in Cabo, posted 3 weeks after the estate closed. I remembered him saying, "Money comes in waves, you just gotta ride it." And suddenly, it all looked different. On Wednesday, I walked into Darlene's office, wearing the same blazer I'd worn to Dad's memorial. It still smelled faintly of lavender, my mother's perfume. Darlene was kind, efficient, but not naive. She looked at me with careful eyes when she handed me a folder. "Darlene, these are the original bank transfers. The estate assets were split, but there's something odd about the timing." I flipped through the pages, Dad's accounts, payout logs, and there, in black and white, a transfer to me for $42,000 one time. No follow-ups, Bryce's side. 3 disbursements, one for $42,000, another for $118,000, marked investment trust, a third one for $90,000, into a family business venture. "Darlene, did you authorize a reinvestment of your portion?" I stared at her. "Me? No, I didn't even know that was an option." She frowned. "Darlene, then it looks like your brother transferred funds from the estate into a new account, one where he had sole signatory access. There should have been dual sign-off if he was acting as executor. I felt my jaw lock. Me. Can you help me trace that account? She nodded slowly. Darlene, I'll file a request, but it'll take a few days. That night, I sat on my porch with a blanket, a mug of chamomile, and a spiral notebook. I didn't write anything for a while. Just listened to the train whistle echo through the valley. Then I opened the notebook and drew a single line across the middle of the page. Above it, I wrote, humiliation. Below it, leverage. I stared at that check. Again, dot blank, but not useless, because that check had a serial number, and serial numbers tell stories, especially when you know where to look. I picked up my phone and texted, Darlene again, me. One more thing. The check he gave me last weekend. I'd like to know which account it was drawn from, because I had a feeling. That check didn't come from his company account. It came from the siphoned one, and if it did, he just handed me physical proof, with his signature, that he'd used misallocated funds for a personal humiliation stunt. My hands didn't shake anymore when I held that envelope. Instead, I began to smile, not because I forgave him, but because I knew the quiet war had already begun. I heard none of the theatrics I wanted to stage. Instead, I learned the quiet rituals of building a case, paperwork, phone tags, forms with boxes. To check that felt like assembling a skeleton. I made appointments. I sat in small waiting rooms with a pen between my fingers and the check folded inside a book. I learned to ask questions in a way that made people give me the precise phrase I needed to repeat at the courthouse. A bank officer, when gently framed, volunteered a copy of a wire confirmation. A cousin, when asked the right way, remembered a late-night visit and agreed to recount times when Bryce had been unusually secretive. A nephew forwarded a text where Bryce joked about clearing the estate up in time for summer. Each small admission was a nail. I also learned to armor my emotions. At first, every new file set my throat to burning. I found myself replaying the funeral, the smell of lilies, the awkward way people hugged me and stepped back. Grief was a textured thing, and mine had been harvested like a crop. But the deeper I dug, the more practical I became. Anger turned into questions. Questions became documents. Documents became leverage. There were moments that felt almost ordinary. I found a comfort in routine. Early mornings at the library where I could print records and photocopy bank statements. Lunches, eaten alone at a diner where the waitress called me, Darlin, and refilled my coffee without asking. Daisy sprawled in the sink while I did dishes. A silent judge and balm. Still, there were flashes that stung. At a family picnic 2 weeks later, Bryce bumped into me and murmured, Hey, everything okay? Don't make a scene. His hand brushed mine. A small casual touch meant to claim territory. I met his eyes, neutral, and smiled like I'd rehearsed. Inside, a small strategy board clicked into place. Documentation, witnesses, timing, no scene. Then Darlene filed the subpoena. The bank records came in a manila envelope that smelled faintly of toner and bureaucracy. I opened it at my kitchen table with Daisy watching from the radiator. All cat eyes and patience. There they were. Transfers back and forth. Papers adjusted. A line item labeled as maintenance with no invoice. A withdrawal authorized while Dad was in hospice. My hands trembled when I called Darlene, me. There's a withdrawal dated while he was in hospice. How do you even... Darlene, we can call witnesses. Medical records will corroborate his condition. This looks like exploitation, not error. Those words sharpened everything. The ledger stopped being abstract and became a moral map. Each discrepancy was a coordinate. Each coordinate implied a witness, a date, a document. I served notice to Bryce through Darlene. It was simple. A letter outlining discrepancies, proposed remedies, and the pending legal steps. It arrived at his office like a small cold parcel. He called the next morning. Bryce, voice clipped. Danielle, is this necessary? Can we just talk? Me, you can talk. Or we can let the bank and the court do their work. Your choice. He tried guilt, charm, gaslighting. Old truths. I listened. I kept breathing. The conversation ended with a promise that his lawyer would call Darlene. At a later brunch, he sat opposite me and said, softly, I just want this to be over. For Mom. For the family. I looked at him across the pancakes and felt the long, slow irony. The family he wanted to protect was the one he'd quietly plundered. I smiled without warmth. Me. Then do the right thing. The legal machinery moved at its own slow, steady pace. There were delays, bank objections, requests for more documents, an angry voicemail from his lawyer. But each motion added weight. I woke up more anchored. The humiliation that had lit me at dinner lost its corrosive edge. It became a metronome that kept me steady. On a humid afternoon, Darlene told me the bank had agreed to a mediated settlement conference. They didn't want litigation. They offered to freeze the account pending mediation. Me, freeze it how long? Darlene, long enough to preserve assets. We can propose terms. Make a list of priorities. I made a list on a legal pad. Pay outstanding medical debts. Repair the house. Secure Mom's independence. Restore my rightful share. Restrict unilateral withdrawals during mediation. Practical. Surgical. When settlement numbers surfaced months later, they weren't cinematic. They were practical. Unpaid bills covered. The roof repaired. College funds secured. Quiet justice that rebuilds. I kept the original check in a small box on my bookshelf. Sometimes I take it out and hold it up to the light, tracing the blank amount line with my fingertip like a seam. It no longer mocks me. It reminds me how leverage can be born from humiliation. If you're willing to read the fine print and do the tedious work, by then, family gatherings had shifted. People that used to laugh learned to pause when certain phrases were used. Mom still refilled glasses, but she asked different questions. Conversations about what Dad wanted became anchored by documents and recorded memories. The chandelier still glowed, but the light felt less like stagecraft and more like illumination. The war I had staffed was not revenge, but restoration. It required paperwork, patience, and the discipline to keep asking uncomfortable questions. It required me to turn shame into evidence and embarrassment into a plan. And it taught me that sometimes the most effective way to be powerful is to be boringly, ruthlessly consistent. I had walked into that first dinner as the woman who'd been laughed at. Months later, I was steadier. Not unscarred, but deliberate. The blueprint carved from humiliation became a map. The map led me to a life that ran on order, rather than other people's whims. In the quiet, when the house slept and the train sighed in the distance, I allowed myself a small vindication. It was better than spectacle. It was proof. It was mine. I wasn't raised to be vengeful, but I was raised to pay attention. And growing up with a brother like Bryce, you either learned how to read between the lines, or you got flattened. I chose to read. It took 4 business days for Darlene to get back to me. 4 long, sleepless, coffee-soaked days, where every minute stretched like thread pulled too tight. I checked my email like it was a lifeline, refreshing it every few hours. Morning, noon, midnight. Each time the screen stayed empty, my stomach sank a little further. Then, on the 5th morning, her name appeared in bold. Subject line, update, inside, 1 line. Danielle, I think you'll want to come in for this. That was all. No explanation, no attachment, just that sentence. But it was enough to light my pulse like a fuse. I didn't even stop for gas. The warning light blinked the whole drive up I-65, orange and accusing. The sky over Nashville was that brittle March, gray that feels like static in the air. Every traffic light took forever. Every song on the radio sounded wrong. When I finally pulled into Darlene's lot, the clouds were stacked low and heavy, pressing the city flat. Her office smelled like paper and faint coffee. The scent of patience and quiet wore. She didn't smile this time, just slid a folder across the desk. The weight of it deliberate. Darlene, your instincts were right. I stared at the folder like it might burn through the desk. My hands didn't shake, not yet, but the air felt thin. Inside were documents, copies of bank statements, transfer receipts, digital records. The top page bore a name I didn't recognize. Monroe Legacy Holdings, LLC, a holding company, registered just 3 weeks after our father's funeral. The owner, Bryce Monroe. But the deposit that started it, the seed money, came straight from our father's estate. The wire memo read, temporary transfer for investment allocation. Will repay with interest. Except he never did. I stared at the page until the black ink blurred. There it was, in print, routing numbers, signatures, digital authorizations. My name wasn't on any of it. Not as beneficiary, not as executor, not even as a courtesy CC. He hadn't just stolen money. He'd erased me from existence, on paper, where it mattered most. Darlene, this is financial misconduct at minimum. Possibly fraud. The words hit like cold water. I swallowed hard. Me, how hard would it be to prove intent? She gave me that look again. Measured, steady, no sugarcoating. Darlene, you've already got it. That check he gave you, that's your leverage. She slid a second sheet toward me. A scanned image of the check, serial number, timestamp. Drawn directly from the very account he swore didn't exist. He mocked me with a receipt. When I walked back to my car, the cold March wind scraped across the windshield. I sat there, engine off, heater humming, staring at the grey blur of the city through the glass. My breath fogged the air, small clouds fading fast. Everything was loud. The rush of passing cars, the tick of the hazard light, my heartbeat. The world outside felt too normal for what I'd just learned. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. He'd stolen from me, but worse. He'd made me doubt my own memory. Now, I had proof. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the length of my house, floorboards creaking under my bare feet, replaying everything, the funeral, the signatures, the lies disguised as comfort. Every time I reached the kitchen, I saw that check on the counter, glowing under the dim yellow light. The next morning, I called Darlene again. She gave me a name, Teresa Grant, forensic accountant, sharp as glass. Darlene said, "You'll like her." She was right. Teresa's office was cluttered with screens, coffee mugs, and sticky notes. When I handed her the folder, she flipped through it with brisk, mechanical precision. Teresa. He left a trail. Most arrogant men do. Her tone was dry, almost amused. I liked her instantly. For 3 days, she combed through the numbers. I brought coffee, donuts, and quiet company. Every so often she'd mutter to herself, "Teresa, here's where he moved it into crypto. Classic." Or, "Teresa, he used your social security number here." That's bold and illegal. The tapping of her keyboard became a soundtrack. Rhythmic, surgical, relentless. Each click pulled another thread loose from Bryce's perfect tapestry. By Friday, she printed a stack of pages and slid them across the desk. Her nails tapped the final sheet. "Teresa, here's the total. Every move he made. Every lie he signed." I traced the columns, transfer amounts, dates, comments, each line like a small betrayal written in numbers. And then I saw it, an email chain from Bryce to one of his partners. Plain as day. Don't worry. Family's not involved. I've got full control of the seed money. Seed money. My inheritance. Dad's last gesture turned into Bryce's personal startup fund. I stared at the final figure at the bottom of the report. $258,900. $258,900. That's how much of me he'd stolen. A laugh escaped me. Sharp, cracked, not human. It filled the quiet kitchen that night like something breaking free. Daisy wound around my ankles, soft fur brushing my skin, grounding me in the moment. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about equilibrium. Restoring weight to what had been hollowed out. I wasn't going to storm in screaming. Bryce loved drama. He'd weaponize it. He humiliated me in public. I'd repay him in the same setting, but elegantly. The plan took shape in silence. No shouting, no threats, just structure. I called my cousin Lila, the one person in the family who still spoke to me like a person, not a problem. Me. Hey, I was thinking, maybe I should host the next family dinner. There was a pause. Then her voice, bright, teasing. Lila. You? Wait, seriously. Danielle, that's amazing. I thought you hated those things. Me. Oh, I do. But this one's special. A thank you dinner. I have something I'd like to give Bryce. In front of everyone. Lila. Wow. Look at you. Stepping into your power. She had no idea. I rented the private dining room at the Gables. A restored mansion that smelled of oak, rosemary, and old stories. The chandeliers glowed soft amber, the kind of light that made everything seem polite, until it didn't. I used the same caterer Mom always did. The buttered rolls, the roast chicken, the almond green beans, the taste of nostalgia disguised as comfort. Then, I printed two things. First, a framed copy of the check Bryce had given me. The one with his arrogant signature and that blank line. I had it printed on heavy linen paper, the kind used for legal documents and certificates. The ink gleamed faintly when it caught the light. Second, a notarized legal notice of ownership, reallocation, drafted by Darlene, supported by Teresa's findings, signed by Bryce's former financial partner. The one, smart enough to jump ship before things collapsed, effective, immediately. Because here's the thing. When you build a company on stolen funds, every dollar is contaminated, every signature a liability, and when you get caught, restitution isn't optional. I had all the receipts. When the night arrived, I wore navy blue. Dad always said, navy made me look like I meant business. It felt like armor. The restaurant buzzed softly with conversation when I arrived early. I checked every place setting, every flicker of the candlelight, every polished fork. This wasn't revenge. This was symmetry. When Bryce walked in, he looked like success personified. Tan, expensive suit, that same lazy grin. He clapped me on the shoulder. Bryce, didn't think you had it in you, sis. Look at this. Fancy. I smiled just enough. Me. I figured I owed you a gesture. After all, you gave me one. He chuckled, oblivious. Dinner unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Wine flowed. Conversations overlapped. Laughter swelled and died in waves. When dessert plates were cleared, I stood. Me. Thank you all for coming. I know it's rare to have everyone together, but tonight's special. I wanted to give Bryce something. Something he gave me once. Something priceless. Every head turned. The room hushed. The kind of hush that leans forward. I reached behind me and lifted the framed check. Carried it to him. The glass caught the light. His grin widened as he took it. Bryce. Wow. You kept this. Talk about sentimental. Me. Actually, I framed it. As evidence. The laughter thinned. Even the air seemed to pause. Then I slid the second envelope across the table. Its weight made a soft thud against the linen. Me. You'll want to read that carefully, especially page 2. He frowned, opened it, scanned fast. Then again, slower. His eyes darted from the paper to me. Color drained from his face. Bryce. What is this? Me. Your signature. Your trail. Your mistake. Silence. Forks frozen midair. Even the candle flame seemed still. I took a breath. Steady, certain. Me. You once told me to write in what I thought I was worth. So I did. Legally, with interest. You built something on my inheritance. And now, I own what's mine. He stood so fast his chair screeched against the hardwood. Bryce, you can't do this. You don't understand how any of this works. I tilted my head, calm. Me. That's where you're wrong. I finally do. Lila's hand found mine under the table. A small, warm anchor. Bryce looked around the table for backup, but no one met his eyes. Even Mum stayed quiet, her lips pressed white around the rim of her wineglass. He left before dessert. No one stopped him. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel small. I felt exact. The next morning, I woke up to silence. Not the kind that's empty, the kind that feels earned. Outside, the Tennessee sky was bruised with early April clouds, and the air smelled like rain was coming. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, holding my coffee, watching droplets collect on the porch railing. The house breathed with me. Refrigerator hum. The faint tick of the wall clock. Daisy's small paws, pattering as she leapt to the window to watch the world slick itself in grey. It was done. The performance. The exposure. The look on Bryce's face when he realised the game was over. That moment replayed like a clip on a loop. The slow blanching, the chair leg screech, the candlelight catching in the glass over his signature. But the real work, that was just beginning. I rinsed my mug and set it to dry, listening to the first soft taps of rain. I let myself stand very still. My body kept waiting for a tremor that didn't come. The shame flush, the aftershock. Instead, there was weight. Not heaviness. Weight, the kind that makes you stand steadier. Darlene called me around 9. Her number lit across the screen like a verdict. Darlene, you did it. Me. Not yet. Darlene. No, Danielle, you did. That transfer of interest form you served him with. It's enforceable. Based on the fraud documentation and lack of consent, we filed a formal claim this morning. Your name is now on Monroe Legacy Holdings. I closed my eyes, let that truth sink in like rain into thirsty ground. I didn't just get my money back, inherited the empire he built with it. Teresa had been, right, arrogant men always leave trails. They never imagine anyone will follow them into the dark. Bryce had operated like no one was watching, like family couldn't fight back, like grief was a fog he could walk me through blindfolded. But I had, and the next step wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. After I hung up, I took out a legal pad and wrote a new list. Transition items, I titled it. Underlining twice. Bank signatories, HR notifications, vendor audits, client letters, office keys, IT access, insurance reviews, board notifications. Not glamorous. Not cinematic, just the practical work of taking a thing back by touching every piece of it. I drove to his office that afternoon. Rain softened the edges of the world. Wipers kept time like a patient drummer. When I turned into the lot, I passed the visitor spaces and slid into his reserved spot. The paint on the curb, still fresh with his name. The receptionist looked up, startled. Not hostile, not warm. Just surprised to see a ghost walk through the front door in daylight. Receptionist. Miss Monroe, we weren't expecting me. It's all right. I won't be long. I didn't announce myself beyond that. I moved down the hall that had always smelled like new carpet and ambition, pausing at the framed mission statements. Built on integrity. Led by family. The font was expensive. The sentiment borrowed. I stepped inside the executive suite that used to be his. It smelled like cedar and stale ego. Leather that's been polished for guests, not for work. Photos line the wall. Bryce shaking hands with investors, posing beside cars he'd never paid off, smiling in front of that banner, a row of awards with plaques that praised growth, innovation, leadership, the kind of awards you buy with sponsorships and a well-placed handshake. I took one. Down. Not out of spite, just to make space. Because this office was mine now. I sat in his chair, ran my fingers along the desk's edge. The wood was warm, nicked in a few places where a ring had scraped, where keys had slid. There was still a coffee ring on the right side. He always said he didn't need coasters, because real wood gets better with scars. Ironic. I opened the center drawer. Inside pens, receipts, an old Metro Council pin from some event he bragged about for months, 2 cufflinks that didn't match each other, a folded program from Dad's service, the crease worn white and tucked beneath a manila folder was a photo of us, kids me in pigtails, holding a snow cone too big for my hands. Bryce with his arm around me, grinning like he actually meant it. We were on the county fair steps. The July sun had burned our noses pink. Dad must have taken it. The angle was a little off, thumb, almost in frame. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Then I slid it into my purse. Some things weren't meant for office shelves, or maybe they were, but not like that. Not next to a plaque that lied about family. I started opening doors. The credenza held binders labeled Q3 Forecast. Vendor roll-ups, legacy projects. I took out the legacy one and skimmed half ideas, big promises, not much paper behind them. I made a note to have Teresa audit each claim against actual receipts. When I turned, I caught my reflection in the window. Navy blazer, rain-damp hair, expression I didn't recognize at first. Not hardness, not softness, certainty. I left the office lights on for a moment after I walked out, like you do with a room you intend to return to soon. At the front desk, I paused. Me, please let HR know I'll need a full list of access credentials and any pending contracts for signature. I'll send the memo by end of day. Receptionist. Yes, ma'am. The ma'am landed strangely in my chest. Respect wasn't a crown. It was a mirror. Later that evening, I stopped by Mom's. She was quiet when she opened the door, as if the house had warned her I was coming. The porch smelled like wet mulch. The hydrangeas along the walk bowed with rain. Mom, you've made quite the splash. Me. I didn't want it to go public. Mom. I know. She stepped aside. We moved through the living room in a choreography we both remembered. The place where Dad's slippers still lingered under the recliner, where the TV remote always lived face down, to hide the worn buttons. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and regret. The windows fogged a little. From the kettle, she poured us both tea. No sugar, no milk, just warmth. We sat across from each other at the table where she used to help me with math homework, back then, when numbers were just numbers, and not the way men stole things from women quietly. Mom, softly. He says you set him up. I looked at her. At her hands wrapped around the mug, knuckles gone thin with age, at the small scar near her thumb from years of can opening. Me. I gave him every chance. He used my trust and Dad's legacy to build something dirty. I just cleaned it up. She nodded, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Guilt lives in the fine lines. It tightens the corners of the mouth. It makes a mother's eyes slick. She loved us both, even when we didn't deserve it. I reached into my bag and placed the framed check on the table. Me. This is what he gave me. She leaned in. Read the line. Traced the signature with one finger, the way she used to trace my spelling tests when she was proud. Mom, I told your father to make Bryce executor. I thought it'd be easier on you, me. It was easier for him. Silence stretched. You could hear the rain thicken, the gutters start to sing. Then for the first time in years, she looked me straight in the eye. Mom, I was wrong. My throat tightened. Words lodged and softened, like bread dipped in broth. I hadn't come for an apology, but I took it anyway, because apologies don't fix anything. They just mark where repair can start. Me. I'm not trying to destroy him. Mom. No, but you're making sure he never destroys you again. We sat like that for a while. Two women in a house full of ghosts, sipping bitter tea and breathing through the fallout, breathing through the years, when I believed the family myth more than my own memory. Before I left, I walked down the hall to Dad's old room. The door was half open. His toolbox still lived under the window. I pulled it out and found a small brass plate he'd saved from an old desk. Property of Monroe. I slipped it into my pocket. Names matter. That weekend, Lila texted me a screenshot. It was from Bryce's Facebook. The post was deleted minutes after, but not before she caught it. Sometimes people take what they don't deserve, but karma always finds them, even if she's wearing heels. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. The sound startled Daisy off the back of the couch. She landed, offended, and stalked away. He still didn't get it. I didn't take anything. I reclaimed what was already mine on Monday. I met Darlene and Teresa at the conference room. We were now calling operations. No plaques on the wall, just a whiteboard, a stack of files, a pot of coffee made strong enough to float a spoon. We went line by line. Ownership transfer, account, closure, audit approval, vendor notifications. A communication plan that told the truth succinctly and left no room for speculation. I even had new letterhead printed. Danielle Monroe, managing partner, Monroe Legacy Holdings. Has a nice ring to it. I approved the proof and told the printer to add a subtle embossed M at the top. A reminder, not a boast. When the box arrived later that week, I opened it like a gift. The paper was heavy, the edges clean. I wrote my name once, slowly, to feel the weight of it in ink. Bryce. From what I heard, moved out of state, California, maybe, or Arizona, somewhere dry, where people forget things easier. Where a man could be new until the past blew in on a hot wind and reminded him who he'd been. But here in Franklin, people remembered. They remembered the story, the sister who stayed quiet, the check with no amount, the dinner that changed everything. I felt it in the diner when I went in for pancakes, the way conversations gentled. When I walked past, not with pity, but with a careful respect. I felt it at the hardware store when Mr. Talley cut me a spare office key and said, "Good for you, kid," like I was still 12 and buying my first lock for a diary. And one morning, a few weeks later, as I walked into the office with coffee in hand, the receptionist called out, "Receptionist, you have a visitor." I turned. It was an older man, suit slightly wrinkled, a portfolio under his arm, shoes polished, but not expensively, the kind of shine done at home with an old cloth. "Man, Miss Monroe, I heard what happened. I was an investor with your brother. I'd like to continue. With you. He hesitated after. Continue. As if the word might be fragile. I held out my hand. Me. Then let's begin again. This time, clean. They come with stillness. It was a month after the dinner when I finally returned to my father's gravesite. No cameras, no announcements, just a quiet Sunday. The air thick with Tennessee spring, heavy with jasmine, honeysuckle, and the faint promise of rain. The cemetery sat on the edge of town, behind the old Baptist church, where the grass stayed a deeper green and time moved slower. The gravel path crackled under my shoes, and every step felt like an exhale I hadn't taken in years. I brought one thing with me, that check. The original one. Still blank, still heavy. I'd had it reprinted on thick cardstock, sealed inside a clear envelope. The paper glowed faintly in the sunlight, the kind of brightness that makes you squint, but not look away. Not to keep, to bury. I knelt beside my father's headstone. White granite. Clean lines. His name etched deep beside the words. Integrity is the inheritance we leave. The phrase hit differently now. Back then, I'd thought it was something poetic. Now, I understood it was instruction. I brushed a few fallen petals from the stone and let that line sit heavy in my chest. Then I spoke, me, softly. He tried to buy my silence. You taught me better. The wind stirred. Dogwood blossoms drifted down. Pale and trembling, I pressed my hand into the earth, damp, soft, forgiving, and slipped the envelope. Beneath a patch of loose soil near, the roots of the tree we'd planted behind his. Plot, a small offering, a symbolic burial, because that check no longer defined me. It defined him, and I didn't need to carry it anymore. The clouds broke open just a little, and the light touched the stone like approval. That afternoon, I drove back into town, windows down, rain misting the air like memory. By the time I reached the office, my office, the sky had cleared into that pale, washed-out blue that only appears after surrender. The elevator chimed open to the top floor. The faint scent of coffee and toner welcomed me, grounding me in the ordinary. Stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Franklin. The square below buzzed with weekend markets and kids running through puddles. The same streets I'd once hurried through, invisible. Now, people nodded when they saw me, smiled, respected. But that wasn't why I came back. Respect was a byproduct. What I wanted, what I built, was redemption, brick by brick. I hired new accountants, honest ones who double-checked even my own expense reports. I cleaned up the company's name, scrubbing away the false legacy Bryce had tainted with arrogance. And then, I started something new, a community grant fund in Dad's honor. It was small at first, 2 scholarships for women from small towns who wanted to start businesses but didn't have the collateral banks demanded. The first recipient, a young mother named Tara, cried in my office when she saw the letterhead. Monroe Legacy Fund, founded 2024. She said, "Nobody's ever believed in me before." And I told her, that's exactly why I started this. Because that's the thing about revenge. If it ends with someone else's downfall, it's just a reaction. But if it becomes the foundation for something better, then it's a reckoning. Lila became my head of communications. Quick-witted, fearless, loyal, Darlene now consults full-time. Her sharp professionalism grounding every move we make. And Teresa still calls every month just to say, "You're running clean, right?" Before laughing, I tell her yes, always yes, because for the first time I can, every morning. I show up at 8:30 sharp. Coffee in hand, folder tucked under my arm. a calm steadiness replacing the rush of vengeance that once kept me awake. The same routine Bryce once flaunted, only with purpose instead of pride. Sometimes, when I pass the conference table, I picture that dinner again, not as a wound anymore, but as a pivot point, the exact moment my life split open and light came through the crack. People ask me how I did it, how I went from being the sister nobody noticed to the woman running the company that used to overlook her. I tell them the truth, me. He handed me a blank check and told me to decide what I was worth. So I did, and I filled it in, not with numbers, but with purpose, with every sleepless night wondering if I'd ever be enough, with every dinner where my ideas were dismissed as cute, with every phone call he ignored, every memory he rewrote, every piece of Dad's legacy he turned into his mirror, filled it in with hours, the ones I spent rebuilding instead of resenting, with patience that tasted like iron, with small-lid victories that never made headlines, but rewrote the script of my life. I filled it in slowly, precisely, and I made him sign it, not with ink, with consequence. Because here's the part Bryce never understood. You don't get to humiliate someone in public and expect the silence to protect you. You don't get to steal quietly and joke loudly. You don't get to hand someone a blank check and forget that she can cash it in with power. Some debts aren't paid with money. They're paid with transformation, and mine cleared with interest. Sometimes I still find his name in old files, a signature at the bottom of a contract, a reminder that he once controlled everything. I don't cross it out. I let it sit there. Proof that I don't need to erase the past to own it. As I lock up the office each night, I pause by the front window. The street lamps outside hum. The light spills in long lines across the floor. Gold on polished wood. The world keeps moving. Trucks down the highway. Church bells faint in the distance. And I breathe. Not like I'm trying to catch up, but like I finally belong. The sky turns that soft southern purple, the kind that comes right after a storm. It feels like peace, not victory, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for witnesses. I glance at the framed quote on the wall, my father's handwriting, from an old birthday card I'd found in his desk. Build something that outlives the noise. That's what I did. I built something that outlived the laughter, the pity, the gossip, and the humiliation. Something clean, something that breathes. And as the lights dim and the doors lock behind me, I whisper to the empty room, not for Bryce, not even for Dad, but for the woman I used to be. You did it. The night air is cool when I step outside. The streets glisten faintly from the earlier rain, and the sound of a train hums low through the valley, the kind of sound that makes you feel small, but alive. For the first time in years, I feel weightless, not because I won, but because I stopped asking for permission to exist. My father would have been proud, not just of what I'd built, but of the silence I kept until it was time to speak. And when I spoke, I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I didn't break. I just changed everything. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.